There has been a great deal of talk that Epstein suffered a hyoid fracture right around the Adam's apple area. But I want to caution our viewers, that's only from sources to the Washington Post, which broke that story. We haven't heard that from the medical examiner herself. So that, I mean, it would be important to know, A, that's confirmed, and B, what I would imagine the nature of that fracture?
Yes. Is my understanding that no details have been released, and we're just simply told what the medical examiner's conclusions were vis-a-vis cause of death, hanging, manner of death, suicide. I would need to see all of the details. Let me say this, that if this is a leaning into kind of a hanging, not someone hurling himself from the top bunk, but if he were, for example, maybe sitting on the lower bunk or kneeling by there, and no evidence of his having been on the top bunk and hurling himself off, then there is no velocity, there is no force imparted to that scenario. Leaning forward, in my opinion, would not lead to what we have been told are, quote, multiple fractures, unquote. We don't know what was broken exactly. No details have come from the medical examiner's office. We're told by the Washington Post and New York Post that the hyoid bone was broken. That's above the Adam's apple by a couple of inches in a good-sized man. And then the other fractures, if they are fractures of the thyroid cartilage, the Adam's apple, in association with a fracture of the hyoid bone, that is highly suspicious and, in my opinion, extremely unlikely to have been caused by a leaning into type of suicidal hanging.
But, Doctor, it's just to be clear, if he's on the top bunk with a bedsheet tied around his neck and propels himself off the top bunk, then the hyoid fracture and maybe another fracture or two, that would be consistent with that behavior?
Yes. If he were on the top bunk and he hurled himself, jumped off, that's, I understand, 5.5 feet high, and then you got his increased height from waist to head, so you got 7 feet or so, roughly. That drop could lead to those kinds of fractures. So I agree, and I want to make that clear that I cannot express an opinion with reasonable medical certainty. I can only repeat what I have said based upon the cases I have myself examined, hundreds of cases over the years in my 20,000 plus autopsies, 40,000 other cases that I have reviewed, supervised, or signed off on, that I have not seen multiple fractures in a simple leaning into kind of suicidal hanging where there is no velocity. Velocity is what gives you force.
Right.
And if you don't have velocity, you don't have force. And that's what this case is all about. They should have done, maybe they have, an investigation of the cell. First of all, why was there a double bunk cell? And then taking out the cellmate the day before. If you got someone who has been on suicide watch, and he still should have been on suicide watch, don't you think that, gee, maybe he might jump from the higher balcony?
Right.
Why are there two bunks like that? There are a lot of things that have to be correlated with the anatomic findings. What exactly was the position of the body? Was he kneeling as if he had just leaned forward? If you hurl yourself off, I heard you say, quoting somebody else, that, well, he might land like that on his knees. Yeah, you can do that. You can even do it with people. You don't have to tie their necks or so on. But guys that do stunts and so on, give them some knee padding. Let them jump off and see how they land. It's highly doubtful they're going to land in a kind of a bent over, kneeling position from the waist. Highly unlikely.
And you'd want
yourself from 5.5 feet high.
You'd want to look for abrasions on the knees and other evidence of trauma to the body.
Yes.
Dr. Cyril Wecht,
yes,
many thanks for being with us. Good to see you. Without a doubt, the irregularities surrounding Epstein's death are downright shocking. Today, Fox News learned that Attorney General William Barr has dispatched 2 senior Department of Justice officials to the Metropolitan Corrections Center to gather additional information. Those officials have been there actually since Thursday. Joining us now with a full report is Catherine Herridge. Catherine?
Thanks, Greg, and good evening. We could get a readout as early as next week of the Justice Department's preliminary findings into the Epstein case. They are investigating how Bureau of Prison staffing and overtime may have contributed to events surrounding his death. The Attorney General William Barr, as you mentioned, dispatching 2 of his top aides to independently gather information and speak directly with Bureau of Prison staff at the MCC where Epstein was held.